You're listening to Now It's the News. I'm Beowulf Rockland. Today we're speaking with Jessica Bruder. She is the author of Nomadland, Surviving America in the 21st Century. Jessica, welcome to Now It's the News. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the open road, it used to be something that Americans aspired to, getting out there, traveling across the country, traveling in an RV, maybe even living in one. It seemed to be a promise of freedom. But your investigation that you conducted and written up in this book really seems to be the opposite. It seems to be what people are doing on the way down as opposed to doing on the way up.
Yeah, it's funny. Whenever I saw an RV, back before I started working on this book project, I assumed that the occupants were probably the last of the great pensioners, enjoying their golden years on some secure savings and, going to see everything from Old Faithful to Niagara Falls and just, writing postcards along the way. And it just seemed like this really just charmed existence. And while those people, by all means, are still out there, they've been joined by a whole new group of folks who have really been battered around by the economy, particularly in a society where we still have, $7.25 is our federal minimum wage, and housing costs keep going up. And for a lot of people, that's put them in a pretty untenable situation, for which going mobile has kind of been the valve that releases some of the pressure.
I certainly see people in my neck of the woods, and I live in southern Oregon, who use RVs or trailers as basically their in-law unit. I mean, this is their plan for a retirement or to help their parents, and I think it seems to me that's something born of economic necessity. Also, how have some of the people that you've talked to made the decision that I can't afford a home anymore, and this is what I'm going to do instead?
Yeah, I mean, the stories are as unique as the people themselves, but for a lot of people in general, 2008 was a wake-up call. But for people in particular who are on the brink of retirement and suddenly faced, without having time to make it up, losing their savings, possibly losing their 401ks, losing the equity in their homes that they plan to retire on, it was really a particularly dire blow. So I met people out on the road who had, again, lost all of those things, and some of them had pretty high-profile jobs during their main careers. And I also met people who'd been caught on a low-wage treadmill and had never been able to put away enough to retire. And, meanwhile, we live in a culture where pensions have been replaced with 401ks. In the 80s, 401ks were cynically marketed as instruments of financial freedom, while really taking the risk off of the shoulders of the employer and moving it over to the worker. And I think that's been kind of a disaster. So we've got all these factors that have people getting out on the road from different economic strata.
We're speaking with Jessica Bruder. She is the author of Nomadland, Surviving America in the 21st Century. What is day-to-day life like for these folks, and is it actually less expensive than what the alternatives are?
I believe it can be less expensive. People envision that folks living this lifestyle are constantly in motion, and that's actually not true. Often it's about getting to where you need to be and staying there for a while. Often they drive less than commuters in urban areas do. So for many people, there are thousands of employers who hire these folks over the country, from Amazon hiring them to do warehouse work, which can involve walking 15 miles on a concrete floor on a day, to Texas oil fields that hire them as gate guards, to the annual sugar beet harvest that hires them to work as ground crew, shoveling beets and doing some other pretty tough work on 12-hour shifts, to campgrounds and national parks all over the country. So that's where you'll can find these people, is doing these jobs. They are tough jobs. They typically do not pay very well. However, they are one small area of the workforce in which ageism does not seem to be a factor. They are taking all warm bodies and all comers. So a lot of people are working those jobs, and when they're not, they are going financially dormant the best they can. Sometimes they're on public lands where they can camp for free or cheap. Often I see people using solar panels to generate their own electricity because the cost of that technology has come down so incredibly within recent years and put it within reach of a very wide audience. So that's some of the stuff that they're up to.
You know, I hate to draw the parallel, but it kind of seems like you've created a latter-day version of the Grapes of Wrath here. I mean, there's basically a motorized itinerant class that's burgeoning in America, and that it seems on the face of it that it can't be good.
I think it's pretty challenging, and one of the big differences between these folks who are out on the road now related to economic circumstances and people who were out in the aftermath of the Great Depression, in my mind, is the post-Depression folks always envisioned reintegrating with mainstream society. So everybody was just figured, this is a temporary anomaly. Things are going to get better, and I'll be back in. And meanwhile, today, I don't think people believe that the cavalry is going to come, that things are going to change, that what is starting to feel like a long emergency, in everything from our economy to the climate to just the overarching situation of, how we're going to make it in the world. I don't think people feel like we're going to return to the old quo. I think the idea that we might seems quite clear to them. So most of the people I met were really planning to do this for the long haul. And that was something that surprised me, but it makes sense now.
It's really incredible. Maybe it's more akin to Mad Max than it is to the Grapes of Mad Max. The Grapes of Wrath, because what is the what's
the Grapes of Meth?
The Grapes of Meth. Like what's the ultimate end here? I mean, how does somebody live out their life in a situation where at some point they're not going to be able to drive, and if we are as a society and hopefully our leaders realizing that there is a growing group of people who are turning to this because there's no economic alternative, what are we going to end up with? A bunch of people driving around filling the roads and with fires in oil barrels to light the chiaroscuro. I mean, what's the end game here?
Oh, I wish I knew what the end game was, but I think the trend will continue to grow, and I also think the crackdown on it is going to keep growing. Right now, we have a widespread wave of what people are worriedly referring to as the criminalization of homelessness. So in many cities and towns, there's just been a giant wave of new laws making it illegal for people to sleep in their cars, which in my mind is pretty heartless and also an indictment of our values as a society, and that we're saying, okay, here's this little blank patch of land. Your car is good enough to stay there, but not you in the car. I mean, in my mind, that says that we value property over people, and it's kind of a screwed up inversion of how we should be thinking. There's also been a crackdown in the national parks. I just got another email yesterday talking about how people who live full-time in their vehicles are being hustled off the land and sometimes not even given the rights that, every person visiting this public land is entitled to in terms of staying there, which is upsetting to me. And at the same time, places where these people gather, I started hanging out with them in 2013, and the numbers are just swelling. The numbers are absolutely swelling. And, there's an interest in the whole tiny house movement and cheap minimalism, but people never talk about the fact that economic factors actually may be shaping even those factors. And I think there's a lot more of that going on than we realize, because everybody has to find a way to make this acceptable. If this is your daily existence, do you know what I mean? You find a way to integrate it with your life that allows you to get out of bed in the morning every day.
You're right, to the extent that this is the only option, but ultimately it would seem that this is an outcropping of a larger problem, which is that we don't have affordable housing in this country, and certainly in places like the San Francisco Bay Area, where there are people working for enormous companies, and often well-paid people who are in this situation that still can't afford basic housing, that's where the problem has to be addressed ultimately. I mean, because certainly, folks in this situation need to have a dignified existence, but we need regular places to live.
Yeah, I met people who were pushed out of the Bay Area when I believe they were in like a manufactured housing park, and that was swept away for luxury condos, and suddenly those people were living in a van because there was really nowhere else they could afford.
Yeah.
I met a guy also from the Bay Area who had been a San Francisco cab driver for many years, planned to retire on the value of his medallion, but got pushed out by Uber, found his medallion was no longer worth a dime, and is also living in a van. So it's really quite striking to see the situations that have gotten these people out on the road.
Yeah. Maybe Tom Joad is out there somewhere, and maybe before he loses the ability to keep driving, he and a few other folks in a similar situation can get together and do something about it, because ultimately, I don't know if there's any other alternative. Jessica Bruder, she is the author of Nomadland, Surviving America in the 21st Century. Thank you so much for talking with us about this, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for caring about these people and their stories.